Hello readers, I'm the Avid reader and today we're reviewing Survivors, a novel of the coming collapse, written by James Wesley Rawles in 2011. So this is a political fiction novel. So this novel is of the coming collapse, so-called coming collapse. And it's basically, you have this so-called thing that occurred, which is the crunch, which is an economic depression happening everywhere. And this is because of the inflationary spending of economics, and the currency technically has no financial backing, so people lose confidence in the dollar or the euro or other currencies, so there's an economic crisis which causes the governments to collapse. In the United States you have a bunch of riots, highly densely populated areas that are called die off quickly. In Europe you have a bunch of terrorist attacks because of the Muslims there. Crime is on the rise and individuals are dependent on themselves. And each chapter starts with a quote, and it's a libertarian ethos. So the thing with this author, James Wesley Rawles, is he's a libertarian and he's a Christian. And those two are linked. So you're supposed to be dependent on yourself and God and think of your family. There's a lot of family themes in this book. So the main character is Andrew Lane, who has been to Afghanistan as a soldier, as an officer, but then when the crunch happens, he has to get back to his family in New Mexico in the United States. And to do this, he has to travel back. But now the planes have stopped and nobody's going to the United States anymore, so he has to go on a long journey. And the family he has there are the Lanes. He has his fiancée there, but he also has his brother, Lars Lane, and he's a retired major and veteran. I think it was in Iraq. He lost a hand because of some explosion, so he's got a prosthetic, and he's on so-called disability pay, but now because of the inflation that becomes basically worthless. And he's a rancher now, and ranchers are really lucky in this era since they're self-sufficient. And in the United States you have guns, so you can protect yourself, unlike in other countries where you can't. And the central government in the United States has basically collapsed. You have this so-called provincial government that's formed by some council members in Kentucky with an army officer, and they start taking over the country with help of UN troops. The two factions of bad guys in this book, one is the government, provincial government, but you don't really see them that much, they're just an ominous president. And then you have this gang from Mexico called La Fuerza, and this is a gang who just pillages and rapes everything it sees, and if you resist you're sure to be killed. And it's led by a psychopath called Ignacio Garcia. It starts out just with a few families being involved in this crime, but it grows and grows, and there are more and more of them. There are also the Phelps trio, three orphans, Shadrach, Reuben and Matthew, who are let go of their orphanage and they travel on horses to try to find a better way in the United States. They're Native Americans and they go and work at the Lane Ranch. So a lot of these characters end up meeting up. And there, the brother Lars Lane, he's basically in control of everything. He makes some deals with some local businessmen for refineries and securities and things like that. And yeah, they're a self-sufficient society because they emphasize this. They're not communist or communal living, but they understand this is in their self-interest, as Ayn Rand said, that collaborating can actually be in your self-interest. That's straight. Back to the main character, Andrew Lane. He travels to Germany, and he's lucky, kind of, maybe not. He's getting decommissioned as an officer because his term is running out, and he gets put in the reserves, so-called, of the army, but in practice that means that he is let go. So he sells a bunch of his stuff and starts making his way back. And an emphasis here is the paper money pretty much is worthless. So the key thing here is to hold silver and gold coins. So he acquires himself a bike in Germany. In Afghanistan, he illegally got a gun from some local shopper. Several times he gets to see hoodlums and criminals. Sometimes he doesn't kill them, sometimes he has to kill them. The first time he's in Germany, he meets them, I believe, in Germany or France. And a warning shot is enough to scare off this gang of youngsters who are skinheads. So he goes on a bike and travels up to the French coast, where by giving some gold, he is able to get the boat across to the English Channel and travel to Britain. In Britain, of course, he's anti-gun, so he has to hide his gun and travel alone. And he meets a nice police officer who gives him a big lamp because if you have a... So he is about to get hurt by some motorcyclists, but he basically bangs them with this big light and they leave. He travels up to the coast of Britain. There he arranges to be brought by a small yacht to Belize. And the reason they bring him is he has a gun, so he's extra security since there are probably some pirates in the water. And there are, so he has to kill some of them. So the first time we actually see him kill anyone is during these water travels. So he gets to Belize, he has had to leave his bike and now he's looking for some other mode of transportation. But while he is looking, he gets pursued by some Guatemalan criminals because Belize is pretty safe in the crunch era. But there are a bunch of Guatemalans coming in who are criminals and stealing stuff. He runs away, I think he sprains his ankle or he twists it really bad. So it's hurt, so he cannot walk, and they take his stuff and he has to crawl back up. Eventually he's found, he's taken to a hospital, then he's taken to these retired doctors. And then the interesting thing is these guys in the army, these so-called ranchers, they speak a bunch of languages, so he can speak some Spanish actually. So he has to be in recovery. For now, about half the book is just a few months, but then it moves on rapidly to a year and a half of nothing much happening but him in recovery, and he gets sick, but eventually he can go away. He gets himself a horse and then travels to Mexico. He keeps his gun hidden because guns aren't really permitted in Mexico, and he has to kill some criminals. Moves on to the United States and he makes it back to his ranch in New Mexico, and his family is ecstatic to see him again, and he marries his fiancée on the spot 20 minutes later. But during all this time you've got the provincial government taking over parts of the United States. They have created a new currency, they have nationalized some industries, and now they ban guns. And there's a prediction that there may be a civil war in the coming. So there isn't any civil war in this book, but it is hinted at that there may be a civil war because of this disarming. We also got this Ignacio Garcia and La Fuerza. Their gang are growing stronger and stronger, and they've pillaged a bunch of small towns and villages, and now they're coming up to the United States deeper and deeper. So now different ranchers and these people who are able to take care of themselves have to ally and go and destroy the mode of transportation because they have these trucks or something like that that allows these guys to move fast. And here we get to meet the Air Force Major Ian Doyle again. So here's a weird thing. Throughout this story you've had another character, Ian Doyle, and he's an Air Force guy. Not that much really happens with him. I mean, he flies a plane with his wife Blanca, and we get the backstory to how he met her in Honduras when he was an airman. So now you've got a bunch of citizens who organize to take out the transportation of these gangsters. So they form a few squads and they go in the middle of the night because these Mexicans are drunk, and they torch these trucks or Land Cruisers or whatever there are. Some of them get into a shootout with some of the criminals. Some people get killed, but none of the main characters actually die. Ian Doyle's brother dies. They go back to their places. They go to safe locations so that they can avoid this gang because they're still alive. And yeah, that's basically the story. So it's really detailed, and there are half a dozen characters, and they crisscross in the end. So how would I rate Survivors? I would say 8 out of 10. It's well written. If you understand guns and different military stuff and Morse code, you're gonna like this book. This is kind of an engineering's nerd book, you could say, and gun nerds. So if you really like details, that's good. There is also a message of how God is important in keeping the community strong. So if you're religious, you may feel a little bit weird about that. The story is well written. It does well what it set out to do, but otherwise it's not anything so great, but it's still a good book. So 8 out of 10. I've read previously James Wesley Rawles' book Land of Promise, which is creating a libertarian country, and that was maybe a bit more interesting, but this may have been better written, I'm not sure. So this was the Avid Reader's review of Survivors, written by James Wesley Rawles in 2011. I hope you enjoyed this book review, and I will see you readers next time.